Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Andrea Piero, Director of the Visiting Artists Program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Each year, the Visiting Artists Program hosts a variety of presentations by internationally recognized artists, designers, and scholars with the mission to foster a greater understanding and appreciation of contemporary art and culture. Throughout its history, the program has served as a critical resource and inspiration for our community. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Gareth Pugh to SAIC as he discusses his practice with Gillion Carrara and Caroline Bellios. Gareth Pugh's visit to SAIC has been a collaborative effort between the Visiting Artists Program, the Department of Fashion, and the Fashion Resource Center. I would like to thank my colleagues for their preparations and contributions to this special visit. I would also like to extend a special thank you to Carson McCall, Starworks Group, and of course, to Gareth for his generosity to share his work with our community. We are very fortunate to have 12 looks from Gareth Pugh's 2017 Autumn-Winter collection on view in the Fashion Department's SAIC exhibition space in the Sullivan Center. So please take some time to go see the display while it is on view through November 10th, and it's located on the 7th floor of the Sullivan Center. At the end of the presentation, we'll have about 5 minutes to take 3 or 4 questions from the audience before the program concludes at 7:30. Our staff will circulate microphones for your use. We ask that if you're posing a question to please stand and share your name and keep your question concise. As with any event, please maintain respect for your fellow audience members as well as our guests. So thank you again for joining us this evening to help welcome Gareth Pugh to SAIC. I would now like to invite to the podium Katrin Schnabel, Associate Professor and the SAIC Foundation Chair in the Department of Fashion. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to see you all. And thank you, oops, can you hear me? Thank you, Andrea, for making this happen. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Gareth Pugh to SAIC today as guest in our Visiting Artists Program. Like many of the accomplished individuals who sat on the stage before him, Gareth stands out for his ability to create indelible images as well as thought-out, provoking, and compelling contemporary cultural reflections through the medium of fashion. Excuse me. In this vein, he's a rare breed of designer who has positioned himself amongst fashion's vanguard in his pursuit of the future through the garments that he creates. Born in Sunderland, England, Gareth Pugh received his degree in fashion design at Central St. Martin in 2003. He showed his first solo collection in London in 2006. He went on to win the prestigious ANDAM Prize in 2008 and began showing his collections in Paris the following year. His striking style of showing his collections is steeped in performative experiences that nonetheless place him in a trajectory of uncompromisingly bold fashion presentations of those who came before him, such as Alexander McQueen, John Galliano, or Vivienne Westwood. But unlike those before him, Gareth Pugh does not give his collections a title or clarifies a theme for a specific show. Instead, his presentations reflect his personal approach to seeing his work as a continuous flow of ideas and influences that build on each other and evolve with each season. There's also a fluidity and movement inherent in Gareth's designs that is well suited to film, another medium that he has frequently tapped to present his collections. The most recent film project was a stunning and moving short film that captured and framed his spring 2018 collection in collaboration with photographer Nick Knight, choreographer Wayne McGregor, and the artist Olivier de Sagazon. Whether referencing a Ridley Scott movie, medieval armor, or Elizabethan ruffles, the looks in his collections provide powerful contemporary imagery that defy being pinned down to a particular period or inspiration, and instead evoke a visionary projection. The same could be said of the strong and powerful women who inhabit his runway shows or films, where even notions of gender blur. Each one of the looks he sends out on the runway is a fully formed character reflecting his experiences costuming for the English National Youth Theatre at age 14, as well as his exposure to the London's club scene. His clothes may appear scaled up for impact or protection in the form of billowing black capes, face-framing collars, and coats that wrap the body like a voluminous duvet. But a closer look at Gareth's work also reveals his passion for craft and precision tailoring. Look at his collections over the span of his career and you will find body dresses made from meticulously cut ribbons of leather, garments constructed entirely out of zippers, as well as the use of innovative fabrics such as nylon printed with aluminum that produce an extraordinary two-way mirror effect. His exploration of new materials, of uncommon processes such as inflatables, and of sculptural form transforming the body is what sets him strikingly apart. Gareth will share his journey as a designer in conversation with Gillion Carrara and Caroline Bellios. Gillion Carrara is the founding director of the Fashion Resource Center here at the SAIC, which is celebrating 30 years this year since its inception in 1987. Gillion is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Art History, Theory, and Criticism, and her materials focus on contemporary and avant-garde dress and fashion. A board member of Costume Colloquium in Florence, Italy, and a member of the Costume Society of America and the International Council of Museums, she lectures on topics of dress, art and fashion, locally and internationally. The other presenter, Caroline, moving fluidly between art scholarship, creative, and critical practice in the expanding field of fashion, Caroline Bellios is an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Fashion Design and has served for a decade as assistant director to the Fashion Resource Center. She also serves as president of the Midwest branch of the Costume Society of America. In this vein, please help me in welcoming Gareth with his forward-thinking approach to fashion and dress, making him a worthy candidate for our Visiting Artist program and why we are delighted to have him here today at SAIC. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you all, and thank you to Gareth for being with us today. We really do appreciate you coming to visit us all the way from London, and for bringing with you some garments of yours which are on display in the fashion department, and we hope that you'll all get a chance to see, and also bringing with you some of your amazing film work that you've done and images of garments that you've created. In your film work, you do an amazing job of blending fashion with film and performance, and it's the hybrid kind of work that our students here do. And so we're really thrilled to have you talking about your process and your career. At the fashion department, the garments that we have on display are from your Autumn/Winter 17 collection, and I know that we're going to be seeing images of those as well.
Yeah.
Could you start out by talking about that collection, which you were working on inspiration-wise just about a year ago?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was just about a year ago. So, I mean, myself and my partner kind of found ourselves going to trips to, we went to China in October, and we went to Moscow last October, kind of like a totalitarian regime kind of world tour, I guess. It was just work, and it wasn't really planned that way, but my partner's a political geek, for want of a better word, and he really wanted to come to Washington, D.C. for the election. We'd never been before, so we thought it was a good opportunity to kind of come and have this celebratory moment. We came and we traveled from Washington to New York on the 8th of November, into this kind of very strange atmosphere that existed, obviously, because of what happened. And it was a very odd time, that, you know, fashion is often seen as such a kind of glitzy sideshow to things that go on culturally, and I think it was very much a decision that we made to, well, you know, you have a choice to either look away or to kind of confront something and look it straight in the eye, and we decided that we would do the latter with this show. So it was kind of something that we, you know, the fashion industry is made up of predominantly like immigrants and homosexuals, so it was very much we kind of felt it was very personal, I think. So we wanted to do something that felt quite confrontational in that regard. So we held this fashion show in this kind of underground bunker. It used to be an old Victorian music hall, but it's all since been ripped out, and it's kind of this big concrete bunker. So we really like this idea of sort of an underground kind of growing resistance. And yeah, I mean, we just felt that, obviously, my work, I don't really like to kind of parlay my work so much with politics, but I think when something like this happens, you have to use the platform that you're lucky enough to have to be able to give voice to certain notions of resistance. So that was the decision behind that show.
So you decided you were gonna say something. You were gonna use the
Exactly.
fashion that you had to be able to give your reaction. Is that something that you find yourself doing in your work for all your collections? Are you always reacting to what you see in the world at that time?
I mean, I think this was the most overt example of kind of trying to really deal with certain things that were going on. I think everything, it's very difficult for me to really answer that question because I think a lot of my work is quite personal and in a certain sense quite autobiographical. So it's very difficult to separate myself from my work. And it is always a reaction to the surroundings that you find yourself in or what's going on. There's I quite often like to describe there's a certain kind of clinical exactness in some of the things that we do, but I think that's born out of the chaos in which you find surrounds you. Working in the fashion industry and trying to make ends meet. So it's, everything's a sum of parts, and I think that's certainly something that comes through in the work.
And is it important to you that when people are viewing your work, they can understand or they can surmise what your inspiration was or what your themes were that you were working with?
No, I mean, for me, if the work is, regardless of what it has behind it, if it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. I mean, regardless of the kind of subtext it has, I think the work first and foremost needs to strike visually. And for me, it doesn't necessarily have to have anything underneath it. It needs to have a visual intensity. And for me, it doesn't really need to have, my partner, husband, work colleague Carson, who I work with a lot, and he does help me see the wood from the trees a lot. And also we work with a big team of creatives, and it's, for example, I hate mood boards, but he makes me do mood boards because we have to convey what we want to do in a collection to a wider team. But I was thinking about it recently. It's kind of a little bit like maths, when you see an equation, but you know the answer immediately, but you have to show you're working out. For me, it's kind of like, it's frustrating to have to show people the inner workings of something, because I know what I want it to be, but then you forget that actually those other people can't see in your head. So I understand that payoff of having to do mood boards and things like that, so I'm fine with that.
When you have an idea for a collection, where and how do you begin? At a desk, with a notebook in a garden, loud music, classical music, an interior thinking, or a recent creative writer? When you're traveling, would you think of a favorite author, or would you start writing yourself? How do you begin?
I think often it's the things come when you least expect them. I think, at least I find that if you're trying to think of something, it's never going to come. I think it's usually when you least expect it, it will come and kind of hit you in the face. And I think it's also kind of it's a particular journey, that kind of agonizing over what you want to kind of achieve. And I think subconsciously those things kind of do kind of like bubble around, and then all of a sudden something kind of, it's a little bit like those lottery machines where there's all these ideas and themes and ideas going around, and then all of a sudden something just shoots up. And it's kind of, that's the thing. And it changes every season, it changes every time I have a problem to solve. There's so many different ways of solving problems, so I think it's a very personal thing to kind of, to describe really, but yeah, there's no really set formula. I don't have a ritual of, okay, I have this thing to do, so I wish I had a garden, but I don't. But
it sounds interior. That's
yeah, there's something that goes on inside. Yeah, for sure.
You have incorporated very delicate chiffon ribbons, referencing summer rites and the raising of the maypole, as well as hard graphic lines of pentagram harnesses. We've seen pagan rituals. What's your process? So again, I'm sort of asking the same thing. Do you go to history books or exhibits? What lures you to history?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to understand what has gone before in order to push forwards. And I've always kind of had an appreciation of history and culture and things that have kind of made a difference. Yeah, I mean, I studied costume from quite a young age, so I have a very kind of theatrical leaning, and I think looking at historical garments is kind of the same as looking at costume, I guess, because everything kind of is fueled towards establishing a character. I love the fact that historical costume, or a great deal of kind of the historical costume that we know, was used more as propaganda than it was to actually just clothe. So yeah, I mean, there's certain elements of that in my work for sure, but we use what we feel appropriate in order to solve a particular problem. And it could be anything. My favorite fabric shop is the local DIY shop. So there's this thing, you can make anything beautiful. You can make anything into something that is beautiful from anything. So I really love that kind of Cinderella quality of working with a roll of plastic from that's usually used as a floor covering when you're painting a wall to make it into a beautiful kind of ethereal thing. So yeah, like I said, it varies greatly.
Students are going to love to hear that.
Okay. I was going to say teachers are going to love to hear that, because you've just validated our insistence that people do historical research. So
nice,
thank you for that. In your most recent collection, which was presented as a film without a runway show, you prominently featured a collaboration with the artist Olivier de Sagazan, who's a performance artist. So I'm interested in how that collaboration came about and what the process was like of working with him.
Yeah.
And then also in that film, you actually become a character in the film as well. And so how it was for you to put yourself inside of the film. And we will have a chance to see this later, so you can ask questions after the film about it.
Well, I first met Olivier, FKA Twigs, a singer and performance artist, did an evening of performances in London, and she worked with Olivier for one of these kind of vitrines, I guess. She did 12 different things over an evening, and this is one of them. It was a very intimate kind of setting. In a very small room, she kind of did this partner piece with Olivier. I'd never really seen or heard of Olivier before, but he's been doing his thing for many years. It turns out, we met him after his performance, and he was super sweet, super nice, very French. We kind of exchanged details, and I kind of forgot about it. And then, again, me and my partner were talking about what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to make a film. We were kind of bored with the idea of doing a show. We also, after doing the show in the bunker, we wanted to do something that felt quite optimistic and quite up. So we approached Nick Knight, who we've worked with many times before, and he agreed straight away to kind of be part of this thing. So, sorry, totally forgot what your question was. How did I meet Olivia
A little bit about collaboration and a little bit about being a character.
Oh, yes, there you go. So basically, Olivia, obviously seeing what Olivia did, I knew it was a very difficult ask. Basically, the conversation between myself and Nick was that we really wanted to partner Olivia with, we were thinking about partnering Olivia with someone like Erin O'Connor, or we were thinking about partnering Olivia with someone like Kristen Scott Thomas, like a really strong female character. But it was it was right in the middle of August, and obviously everybody just leaves London in August, apart from us who have a show to do. So I was always going to be the plan B. And I after the event, we were super happy that there was nobody actually who we'd reached out to who had agreed to do it, because it's such a difficult thing mentally and physically to go through. I guess you guys will see it later on, but it's quite an intense, physically and emotional thing. And I think there's a certain violence to it that I think having him partnered with a woman, the idea of it made sense, but actually the reality would have been so off from what we actually wanted to achieve. I was kind of glad that it didn't turn out. So actually I was the subject, let's say. Like I say, I was having a conversation earlier this morning. I used to be a dancer, so the stage is kind of somewhere. It's a space that I kind of appreciate its power and its presence. Doing what I had to do with Olivia in front of a lot of people who I've known for a long time was very difficult, but it was one of those moments. Basically, the intention of doing the whole film was about the idea of there's a thing in flamenco called duende, and it's about that idea of the connection between an artist and an audience, and about something that's quite untenable and quite difficult to recreate. It's like an emotional bond that's very ethereal. Like if you go and see like an amazing kind of singer, for example, and the audience ends up bursting into tears, it's that kind of connection. And it's the idea of doing something beautiful that doesn't just involve selling clothes. It's about reminding both myself, I guess, and the audience who were there to witness it, that fashion is about more than just commercialization of garments. It's about things having a little bit more to them than that. And I think it was just, kind of calling people out on that idea, because I think people have certainly lost their way with regard to that in recent years.
So then, I suppose my question would be, why fashion? Why do you think that fashion gives you the opportunity to say all of the things that you want to? You had been a dancer, you've worked with sculpture. Why is fashion the space within which you can do the work you want to do?
Well, the quick answer is why not. I had my application written out for the Slade School of Art in London to study sculpture, and I had my application written out for St Martin's. I was very concerned that St Martin's, it's a very tough school to get into, as is the Slade. But I was very worried that St Martin's would find out that I'd applied to the Slade for sculpture for a very different course. So I retracted my Slade application and decided that if I went to study fashion at St Martin's, then I would be able to do both fashion and sculpture. So you get the best of both worlds, and I kind of hope I made the right choice. So yeah, it was a toss-up at the end, but I think it was important for me to kind of have a little bit of direction.
Getting back to what students want to know about, tell us about the development of your fabrics, your materials that we find absolutely fascinating. Are most of them developed for you, or what kind of discussion is there with the textile firms and manufacturers?
Well, we work a lot. I work with the factory in Italy. It's the same factory that produced Rick Owens. So I'm kind of in a very lucky, fortuitous position with regard to that, because there's a lot of fabric suppliers that come and see us and show us their things, and there's some exclusive things. But but you know, there's a lot of stuff that we use that's just kind of plain off the roll kind of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that we have developed specifically for a collection. It kind of really depends what's appropriate and what fits. We never really keep, much to their frustration, we never really keep things from season to season. We always change we always try to change what we do just to kind of keep things feeling fresh. But whereas it's very difficult really to develop something in Italy, because unless you're ordering like 10 kilometers of a fabric, they don't really take you seriously. So I have my studio in London, which I kind of, it's more like my playground, or we get to play with different ideas, and I think it's very important to be able to make mistakes. So we make a lot of mistakes in my studio, and it's a big kind of learning curve working there. And every season we set out to try and kind of do something that we've never really done before with regard to fabrics or fabric development. And there's a lot of blurred vision and bloody fingers when my helpers leave after a season, but they've kind
Beautiful.
of... Yeah.
But we're also fascinated by your use of, industrial fabrics for those garments of volume.
Yeah. Well, we work a lot with plastic. It's great, especially working with inflatables, because it doesn't let any air pass through it. I first started when I did my degree collection at St Martin's using balloons, and then we've kind of progressed that into not just using balloons, but actually padding garments with balloons, and then we started to make garments that were balloons. It's kind of, there's a lot of synergy there, and it's something that we've kind of kept from the beginning and we still play around with it. But I think fabrics that are predominantly made for garment manufacture I don't find a huge amount of interest in them. A lot of what we do pattern-wise is actually quite simple. So I think to actually find an interesting fabric that can do something different than what you perhaps would expect it would is important to kind of investigate, because like I say, the DIY shop has a lot of interesting things in its kind of shelves, and you can have a lot of fun with them. And I think it's important to have fun with things, and it's, working with things that don't necessarily work, but it's just because, and I think it's important to understand the value of that.
So who do you have in your studio? What does your studio staff look like?
Well, it's myself and my partner Carson, who's now my husband, we never met actually through work. We met like many moons ago. We just decided to work together because we weren't spending enough time together.
Right.
And I have a studio manager who's been with me for about 5 years. He's great. And that's kind of it, really, on permanent staff. We work with a lot of colleges, and we work with a lot of freelancers, but my permanent staff's very small. There's just 3 of us. And in Italy, I have a pattern cutter, and I have an assistant, and that's about it. Okay. But I like things that way because you have control. I'm a Virgo, so I like to be in control of things. So you just know what's going on, and everything that's done is done because I've asked for it to be done, rather than, not understanding why something's being made in a certain color or a certain fabric because, I'll have asked for it to be done. It's nice to have a certain kind of handle on what's going on, I think.
So then, being someone who really values having control, being a Virgo, how do you find and build collaborative relationships and engage in those collaborations, whether it's the music for your shows or the films that you work on, and still remain true to your vision?
Well, it's just a lot of personal investment. I mean, I'm not sure how other people go about it, but there's just a lot of conversations involved this season we worked with a different music person. I worked with Matthew Stone, who was one of my oldest friends in London. I've worked with him on music for maybe 10 or 12 years, but this season he was busy and was unable to do it, unfortunately, so I had to find somebody else to step in at the last minute and to try and get some, because obviously I knew the sound for this season was going to be super important because it was a film, not that sound isn't important any other season, but especially when you have a film and you have people sat there, it's a super important part of the whole process. So to try and get somebody up to speed with regard to kind of the level of detail that I like to give to everything, and also the level of expectation that's on him. It was quite a, it's quite a tough ask, especially for someone who I always like to work with people I know, because people understand the stresses and the ebb and flow of how things work. But I was a little bit worried with this guy who, I'd never met him before. It just turned out he was a super cool guy, really understood where we were coming from, was very excited to work with both Nick Knight and Wayne McGregor, and the fact that we presented at the IMAX, which is it's the biggest screen in Europe, and it's got one of the best sound systems. So as a music guy, he was super excited about that. So it's like I say, it's just a lot of conversation. You have to it's quite tiresome sometimes, because it feels like you're starting from all these conversations from scratch every time, whether it's talking to someone who does the hair or the makeup, or talking to Nick and his assistants. And it's just, you really have to know before you start these conversations actually where you want to end up. Otherwise things can get very confused. So there's a lot of talk and arguments between myself and Carson to establish that trajectory or that direction. And then once we've set that, it's very rare that we waver from that. Even working with someone like Nick, I was very surprised this season how much freedom he allowed us to be able to just do what we wanted to do, rather than trying to add in his I mean, he obviously did add in his opinion when it was necessary, but I think he was quite supportive in that way, that he allowed us a lot of creative freedom, and he kind of came in and helped facilitate that. So it's nice to work with nice people, basically.
In fact, do you oversee the different creative forces for your videos, your catwalk shows? How much are you hands-on for the stage, choreography, music, models?
Very.
Sights?
I mean, I couldn't imagine it being any other way. I mean, it's like I say, I don't know how other people work, but if I'm to make a film with, whether it be Nick or with Ruth, it's like we're making it together. I don't just, when I do a show, I don't just hand a stylist a reel of clothes. I know designers who do, and then they go off for a few days and then come back and have a look at what they've done with it. We build things together. I mean, the best example is I've noticed it for the past few seasons, we've decided to show in very dusty venues for the past few seasons, and basically whenever I come out at the end at the show, I've always got these two really dusty knees, because I've always been on the floor trying to work with hemlines and stuff like that. So it's very important for me to be in it and to feel that you're actually doing something, rather than to feel like you're just kind of pointing and directing people. There's a lot of that involved in it anyway, but actually I need to feel that I'm part of something.
Can you tell us more about this process in relation to your fall 2017? And how your spring summer 18 shows, can you talk about them?
In what way, sorry?
How they compared one after the other.
Oh, okay, I see. Well, obviously, fall winter 17 was very much about a reaction to things that were going on, and it was we wanted it to be a little bit like a punch in the face, to kind of essentially make people wake up and understand that things that are happening aren't right and that they shouldn't be allowed to happen. And that was kind of a very knee-jerk reaction, and then we've wanted to follow that up with something that, how do you fight that level of insanity, and you fight that with kindness. So we wanted to do something that started in a very kind of intense way. Basically, Nick was describing it starting at the lowest point you could possibly ever imagine, and ending with kind of this quite cerebral, almost religious ecstasy kind of at the end of the film. So it was this journey from something that was like this quagmire into the heavens. So we wanted to pull the narrative back into something that was ultimately quite positive, because you know, what else is there other than to be able to keep your head up and keep pedaling?
As we have seen in black and white collections, describe how you incorporate British folklore and darker, more menacing visions such as pagan anarchy, illustrating the oppositional forces, positive, negative, chaos, control.
It's difficult. I mean, the light and the dark and the masculine and feminine, all these opposites, I think, are something that are it's something that I'm very attracted to. It's the idea of having these two characteristics exist, or these two polar opposites exist, or coexist in the same thing. You know, the prime example, I guess, is that image of Grace Jones, with these incredible shoulders, looking incredibly aggressive, but being this incredibly beautiful example of femininity. So for me, that's kind of the sort of extreme beauty that I'm attracted to. And that's the niche that we inhabit. The idea of these two opposites kind of, and it's kind of funny when it's like when you put two magnets together the wrong way and they have this fight, this tension. When you have these two opposites coexist within a particular image, there is this tension, and it's that tension, I think that's what I'm attracted to. There's a certain unnerving quality or a certain uncertainty to things, and that kind of ambiguity is something that has an attraction, I think.
What about folklore and pagan anarchy?
Well, we did a whole collection on British folklore, and you know, I'm a huge fan of The Wicker Man. It's, you know, the best B film that was ever made, but you know, Britain has such a kind of clean kind of image at the moment, but it has such a dark history and a dark past, as I'm sure a lot of countries do. But you know, there's a huge tradition of folklore that just is kind of almost forgotten. So I think it was a certain moment, I guess, for us to sort of remember how odd everything is and how odd everybody is, and to celebrate that, because folklore's odd. You know, there's certain rituals and certain traditions that still exist today, that nobody really understands why they do them. They just do them. And I also quite like that generational kind of passing down tradition idea, and that unquestioned sort of idea of celebration and tradition. Yeah, and there's a lot of odd things that exist. So, like I said, it was a celebration of oddness.
So I'd like to ask about, you know, you mentioned masculine and feminine. One of the things that we talk a lot about in our fashion department are bodies, whether they're traditional fashion bodies, non-traditional fashion bodies. And you've used a variety of different ways of approaching the body in your work. In a lot of your early work, you had masculine and feminine people displaying masculine and feminine traits walking the runway. And then we had shows that were strictly women. And then you've kind of come back to bringing in multiple genders on the runway. What was going on there as far as like how you were deciding about who should be on the runway?
I mean, basically, it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, the reason that when I first started showing in London, we didn't have any money to pay for models, so we would use friends, and it didn't really matter if they were male or female. If they could wear a pair of high heels and walk down a runway, it was great. You're in. When we showed in Paris, we used to do both men's and women's wear. We didn't have the resources to show two different shows, so we would combine the two. And sometimes that would come into the narrative of the show, where we would have the women as the strong characters, and we would kind of pepper in the men as kind of accessories to the show. But we stopped menswear, so we stopped including men in the show. So it's kind of as simple as that. But there was another point that I've kind of forgotten what I was going to say.
But you've kind of come back to including men as part of the discussion.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's I did have a really interesting point, but it's totally gone from me. Sorry. No, but I think it's important. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a broken system that in which we work because that kind of idea of showing, especially this collection that we showed autumn winter 17, we use a lot of non-models. But when you do a show, when you're a fashion designer, you do a show, you have like maybe 2 or 3 days to pull everything together that you've worked on for maybe 6 months. And it's such an industry, the model industry. You have girls being flown from New York to Paris to Milan to London, and if you don't have a casting director and you're not able to kind of get certain agencies to work with, it's very difficult to actually pull a show together. And also when you work with an Italian factory, you have a very set kind of criteria of what you're able to produce for a show. We're very limited with the amount of samples we're able to do for a show, so we have to quite lazily, admittedly, produce samples at a model size. And the downside is that all these girls are the same size, and when they come in from straight off a flight from New York, the day before your show, you know when you put that garment on that's going to fit. And that's just unfortunately the reality of the fashion industry. It's quite a lazy industry, and this collection we wanted to try and do something that was different, and it's a much harder process to do, but it's much more rewarding. I just understand why people choose not to do that, because it's actually ultimately a very difficult thing to actually just do, because clothes need to fit the person that they're wearing to make them look the best, and it's not necessarily that the clothes look great on a thin model. It's just a standardization of it that I think makes it easier. So yeah, I think everybody's a little bit guilty of that, but yeah.
And so within that, you're using most often these standard model bodies, but in a lot of your video work, and in fact even in some of your runway work, the body is almost distorted to alien proportions. So what are your thoughts on bodies? What are your thoughts on how you're extending or transforming the body?
Well, I mean, we try and it's a process, but and sometimes we have to kind of approach it in a different way, but predominantly it's about thinking about the space around the body rather than the body itself, and that's a much more freeing way for me to look at things, because it enables so many more possibilities rather than just thinking of, essentially a body's like 2 arms, 2 legs, body, head, and it's, there's a set kind of criteria that you have to work with, but if you include the air space around or under or to the sides, it kind of gives a multitude of possibilities. So we like to think of things in those terms rather than being kind of feeling restricted, and I think there's a lot of space to be able to really kind of play around with body perception and just the way that the body's seen. And I think it's as someone who used to be a dancer and has an appreciation of that kind of movement and the body as a machine, I think all these things kind of feed in to what I do. They don't always necessarily come out the right way, but we certainly start off in that kind of refrain. Yeah.
So thinking about the space around the body, are you ever, how far do you take that, or how far have you taken that, thinking about bodies and like the space that's around them? How far can you push that?
Well, I'm not sure if we've pushed it as far enough. I mean, my very first show I did in London, we had this, it was the closing look. You can't find videos of it online at all because it was so badly lit. But I had a friend wear this cape, and she came out and closed the show, and then she got up on this big box, and she very slowly inflated into this kind of 5 meter tall black globe, and then she kind of walked off with this cape again. It's kind of like, I quite like that day to night option. and it's, you can push it as far as you can, and it becomes, what I quite like to do is to stop just before it becomes comedy, because if things become comedy, people can box it as being comedy, and therefore it doesn't really come into a certain kind of conversation. Whereas if you stop just before that point, it has that unnerving quality where people can't quite dismiss it. So again, it's a balancing act with regard to how far we like to push things. Yeah.
So then, asking about unnerving people who are watching your show, you're often covering faces, whether it's having nylon over the face with exaggerated features illustrated on them, or in the video that we'll see where some of the models don't have eye slits to be able to see, or in the Autumn/Winter 17 show where they had really interesting objects on top of their eyes. So because it seems to be running throughout your work, this idea of faces and eyes and seeing.
Yeah, our models don't like us very much. I mean, when I first showed in London, the face covering thing was because we were working with friends, and it was to mask the idea of it being male or female, but it was also to take away, as human beings, we're kind of so attuned to, when anybody walks out into a room, you instantly go to their face, and it was to kind of take away that knee-jerk reaction to go straight for a face, because I was a little bit kind of arrogant at that time, and I was more concerned with people looking at what I'd been working on rather than who was wearing it. And it's still quite an issue for me. I never really fully appreciate that kind of idea of casting, and I understand that it's important to have. I understand when it's right, because we work with some incredible models, and I really do understand about it more now, but back then I kind of really didn't understand the idea of the right person wearing the right thing. It was more about just covering their face, not really bothering about what happened from the neck up, and just getting them to walk down the catwalk and back up. But it's a continuing theme, simply because it's playing around with the idea of masking or disguise. Fashion's always about fantasy, and it's why I love the idea of makeup, because it has a transformative quality. And we made basically these things from Autumn/Winter 2017. We made the kind of essentially those things that you wear when you go into a sunbed, but we kind of made our own versions of them. And they had this kind of incredible bug-like quality, and it was that idea of kind of the blind leading the blind, but the models weren't necessarily supposed to not be able to see. But it turned out that we hadn't actually tested them for long enough, and the venue was very cold, and the models were very hot, and there was a lot of condensation going on in these eye covers. So it was quite an interesting show, to say the least. But yeah, it's just it's something that we like to play with, because it's an easy device to kind of turn things a little bit on its head.
Why the architectural elements in your textiles as well as your structures? We know you love triangles.
Yeah.
What else about angulars?
Well, it's kind of a little bit like play school, like when you work with geometric shapes, I think it's quite easy to understand. I love the idea of the triangle being quite it's a stronger shape in architecture. You just have to look at something like the Eiffel Tower to understand something like that. But when you flip it upside down and it becomes inverted, that idea of it being, it has a directional quality. It's like the point of an arrow. They used to use it a lot. In Tudor times, when people had commissioned portraits to be painted, those portraits weren't necessarily hung on a wall, they were for propaganda. And, these huge crinolines that would point up to a face, it was the idea that it directed a certain attention towards what they wanted people to look at. So I think seeing things in simple geometry, I think it's quite, it's quite a simple but actually quite well-trodden road for creating images that kind of really penetrate. Because you know, whether it's conscious or subconscious, people kind of tend to understand that simplicity and that kind of composition. So yeah, that's why squares, rounds, triangles tend to pop up a lot in my work.
So along a different vein, thinking about place, you have your studio in London, but you've shown your work in London, in Paris, in New York. What is the importance of the place that you make and the place that you show?
Well, we've always, regardless of where we've shown, we've always lived and worked in London, and I think that's kind of a super important part of the work. London's always going to have this kind of vitality and this energy to it that I love it for, and it's kind of the reason I moved there in the first place. The interesting thing about the where to show, I mean, I won the ANDAM Award in 2008, and that September I had my first show in Paris, and it was actually a show that I designed thinking I was going to show in London. So we didn't, a lot of people thought we designed that first show in Paris as being like a real seismic step away from what I used to do, but it happened that, it was serendipity, basically. Obviously, the difference between showing in London and Paris is that you have very different peers. You know, you have Chanel, Dior, and Givenchy, and it's quite intimidating. And it's kind of, for me, it was a really necessary kick up the backside to kind of really pull something out of the bag. But I mean, for me, showing back in London now, it's where my creative family are. It's where, like I say, where we live and work, and it has a certain energy to it that we like to embody and imbue in the show. I really don't think it makes a difference where you show, because it's about the work. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sorry, that was a really bad answer, but...
Well, can I just follow up and ask, you talked about London having a really creative energy. Talk a little bit more about London. Why is it different from other cities that you've been to?
Well, I mean, the one example I like to use is I went to St Martin's, and St Martin's used to be right in the middle of Soho, in amongst all the sex shops and the gay bars, and you used to, on a Friday afternoon, you could go to the library at St Martin's, and St Martin's Libraries looks out onto a street in Soho called Greek Street. In Greek Street, there's a lot of strip joints and dive bars. There was a strip joint underneath the library at St Martin's, and so on a Friday afternoon you could go and do a bit of research, but you could hear the bass music of the club underneath where the girls would be practicing on the pole, and it's that kind of mixture of this such high and low, and good and bad, and all these kind of polar opposites existing or coexisting or trying to coexist. I think in London, if you want something done, you really have to fight for it, because it's not an easy city to live. It's very expensive. It's, you know, you can spend like 5 hours on a bus trying to get from one place to another place. You know, nothing's set up to make London work, but it works, because it's full of people who are just so hungry to make something happen for themselves. And myself included, you know, I went to college with a lot of very talented people, more talented than myself at doing what they had to do at college, but I maybe just wanted it more than they did. It was a lot of hard work when you left, harder than actually, you know, St Martin's was I thought when I left was the hardest 3 years of my life, but actually, like, this coming February is 13 years of me doing what I currently do, and those 3 years are like a walk in the park. So, you know, yeah, that's why I love London. It's kind of quite a masochistic way of looking at it, but I like London because London doesn't really suffer fools gladly. You can sink or swim, basically. Yeah.
And then also thinking about place, what kind of place does film represent? it's not a city, it's not, in your films, we're not in a particular place necessarily, so do you see working in film as kind of freeing you, or?
Yeah, I mean, we very rarely work, I mean, the reason we very rarely shoot on location is simply because of logistics and being pragmatic about budget and things like that, but the other reason I like to do that is that it doesn't ground your film in a particular setting. You know, you have a blankness to the world around you. I mean, it's the same thing with the shows. You know, we very rarely show in something as kind of dramatic a setting as this show that's currently up on the screen, because I like the clothes to be able to be the narrative rather than having things around that distract. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I think why it's important for us to have a sense of directness when we produce a piece of work like a film, that it doesn't have bells and whistles around it. It's quite a stripped back, quite to the point kind of exercise. Because I think messages can be lost if you include too much around them. If there's too much visual noise, then yeah, you can get lost. But that's why I like to keep things quite to the point.
Although you stated in an interview that the show is about the fashions on the catwalk,
Yeah.
although the shows are spectacles and dramatically staged, romantic, dark, so how does the viewer focus on the clothes?
Well, I mean, I'd like to, I don't know, I mean, I won't put you on the spot, but I very rarely show in a place that has any kind of visual distraction other than the fact that maybe when it warrants it, it kind of adds to the narrative. Every decision, even down to the venue that we decide to show in, has always got something to do with the intention behind the show. In answer, I guess, to that question, it would heighten the experience rather than to distract, because our choices are very much informed by the story we want to tell, rather than trying to distract from the collection itself. It's supposed to add to, like, the idea of showing in an underground bunker this collection of resistance, and I don't know. It kind of makes sense to us.
Okay.
So fashion is ever-changing. It's a system that you work within, but you also push against the boundaries of.
Yeah.
So how do you define success for yourself?
I think success is measured in the fact that I'm still going. I feel very lucky to be able to do something every day that I wanted to do when I was kind of little. I think I'm very lucky, and you know, there's a lot of people to thank, and you know, there's a lot of being in the right place at the right time. But I think just being able to continue to kind of create things and make things and be part of the conversations, more than I could ask for going forward into the future as well, to kind of just still be able to have that ability to communicate with people on a visual level, and to, I guess, I don't know, be the thorn in many people's sides. I quite like that little niche that I've carved out for myself, but it's a good niche. It's an important one.
And so thinking about the future and what you might do, because you've worked so much in film and you've created short films and slightly longer films, do you see yourself ever moving into feature films? We've seen Tom Ford is now a director, Rodarte is experimenting with creating feature films. Would you take on a narrative feature film?
I mean, probably not. I mean, I always say I would never say never, but I understand that making a feature film is an incredibly laborious, time-consuming process, which I'm fine with, because you know what I do is. But my attention span is quite well suited to this kind of 6-month time span. So I think anything longer than that, and I think I might have to start ripping my hair out. Films can take a long time, so I think the film we made that you're about to see, and I apologise, it is about 16 minutes long. It's not the longest film in the world, but it is quite a long lead. So that's about as long as that as we'll get for now. It was long enough.
And I just want to check time and see, we have a couple more minutes before we're going to see the film.
Shall I go on then?
Yes.
What direction, if you can, do you see fashion taking in the future? Production schedules are shifting, means of reaching consumers are changing, ways of manufacturing are evolving, and as in your work, new methods of presenting are becoming more common. So what are your predictions?
I mean, you know, it's a very difficult question to answer, but I think there's a lot of confusion now. There's a lot of new technology at our disposal that I think a lot of people are very unsure how to utilize, and people are people are experimenting, which is fine. But this whole idea of see now by, I can't even say it. But this idea of kind of stripping away the romanticism and the kind of seduction that I think is inherent in fashion. You know, you see a show, or you see someone's work, and you see it in magazines, and you see it here, there, and everywhere, but you can't quite own it yet. I think that creates a certain desire that if you take that away, then that would be a really big shame. So I think there's a huge move towards these platforms that enable a direct from creator to consumer marketplace. But I think that's something that will exist, and then perhaps do a U-turn back to this quite old school version of appreciation of, you know, people like to be seduced, I think. And people need this kind of fantasy in their lives. They don't just want to see something incredible and then have it delivered in a plastic bag the next day to their doorstep. I mean, maybe you do, but I think, fashion's going through a very strange time at the moment. Let's just say that. And I think it's fine to play around with things, but I think that it will settle on a more even keel where people feel a little bit more connected to things.
Okay.
We've even heard that, you know, what you're doing is you're selling a dream, or you are selling a nightmare, or, you know, that seems to be something we hear in fashion all the time, is the designers are selling us something very beautiful,
fashion's
poetic.
about a fantasy, you know, essentially. It's like the reason that you would walk into a department store and want to buy Chanel lipstick rather than the, I don't know what brands you have in America, but the cheaper brand lipstick, they're no different. It's just one represents something that the other does not. It has a certain allure that is afforded to it by all of the world in which is created around it. You know, the beauty of a Chanel show, the opulence of a Chanel show, the fact that, you know, you've got Julianne Moore and all these celebrities wearing Chanel. That's what makes you want to buy it, and it's about the fantasy of these people's lives. It's like Cinderella, you know. And also that idea of that the grass is always greener. Everybody wants more. It's such a kind of ultimately kind of a greed-driven industry that it's important, I guess, sometimes to appreciate that and to understand that actually it's not necessarily just about wanting things and things and things. It's about ideas, and it's about. And maybe that's what I'd like for people to appreciate, is that people don't just want things because they want them because they connect. Maybe it's more to their head than to their wallet or their pocketbook, since I'm in America.
Okay, that's wonderful, thank you. So we're hoping that you will all connect to the video we're seeing, which you said will take us from a very low place to...
Yes, I apologize in advance.
We do want to let you know that there is graphic content in this video, so we just wanted to give you a heads up. This would be a very not safe for work video. And we hope to have time for a few questions afterwards. So please, is there anything else you'd like to say about the video before we watch it?
I mean, I think we kind of covered it. It's like I say, it's one of those things that we wanted to do, not to sell clothes, but to just remind people about that there's beauty in things that don't necessarily first appear beautiful, and that those things should be celebrated. And yeah, I think there's a certain beauty in that in its own.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. We're
Cool.
going to exit to allow you better viewing, but thank you so much.
The show.
I don't know if our mic, okay, our mics are back on. We have 5 minutes for questions. So who would like to, ooh, I see a hand right there, I see hands there. I know there's a microphone somewhere. Elizabeth has the microphone, and there's someone right here, so let's start with you right here.
Hello, my name is Tiziana. Oh my God, please make a feature-length film, first of all. That was amazing. But my question was really about the reveal in your clothing. So can you talk a little bit about your apertures and how you choose to reveal and conceal, and where and when those sort of seams become visible?
The apertures? So I didn't really...
Yeah, like the openings and closings, like where things are revealed and concealed?
Well, we don't really do sexy things, and I think there's a certain kind of distinction there between what we do and what a lot of other people do. I think there's something more intriguing about the covering than there is about the revealing of, and we tend to play with that quite a lot. I'm not sure how else to answer that. I mean, right. Well, I mean, the idea of kind of extending a garment beyond this kind of quite obvious kind of cut-off point at the neck is just to kind of add to this kind of quite suffocating or enveloping nature of something. And it also kind of helps to make, obviously, quite a more progressive or directional fashion image, because I think it's also quite disconcerting to see a fashion image that doesn't have a face, or a gender or an identity. It's more an identity based on that you derive from the actual garments themselves rather than the person wearing them. So again, it goes back to that idea of stripping away the person's personality and imbuing them with the personality that's inherent to the clothes that they wear, if that's a good way of answering it.
Yeah. Okay, do we have another question?
Questions here?
Hi. I'm Brock, and I was wondering about how do you find a happy medium between sort of the creative process and actually being able to sell things and support a business? Because at the end of the day, it is kind of like you have to make money, you have to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
How do you, how have you managed to find a way to do that?
Well, we have very distinct boundaries. We have a show and we have a showroom, and we don't want to blur those boundaries, and it's been quite a fight of my own to try and keep what we do or what we have as the kind of public facing arm of what we do to be the thing that is what visually defines us. And we have things that we work on that are kind of, I guess, redactions of those things, or a kind of version of that we offer to sell. And I guess you kind of always have to have that balance, but we're lucky enough to be able to not have that as a kind of primary focus of what we do, because I think, if people want to buy a pair of leggings, they can go into like Army and Navy and buy a pair of leggings, but the reason why people want to buy your leggings is the other things that you make. It goes back to that Chanel thing, like, why do people want to buy that lipstick? It's because that label stands for this, and this, rather than, yeah. So we try and keep those two things. It's like business and it's like art and commerce. They need each other, but there needs to be a certain separation, for me at least, to make it work. Yeah.
There's a question right here up front.
Gareth, thank you for being here. My name's Rich Anderson.
Pleasure.
This is also a business question. I love menswear, and thank you for doing menswear. How is your menswear being accepted in a broader realm? Because I see all of the focus usually on the women's wear, which does sell more, but how is your business end on the purchasing of menswear?
Well, we stopped it, sadly, much to my own displeasure as well, because I used to enjoy wearing it a lot. But and funnily enough, it was quite a big part of our business. You know, men spend a hell of a lot more than they used to on fashion. It was just, there was a point when I was showing in Paris where we were doing women's wear shows, menswear collections, and also pre-collections. So it became with my very small team, and my team didn't grow when we were doing women's shows, women's pre-collection, men's collection. We were doing 6 collections a year, and that was a lot of undertaking when you have to cut all the patterns, you have to cut all the fabrics, and then you have to do all the sizing for that. Basically, it just really started to affect our deliveries to stores. So there has to be a kind of point where you either really heavily invest in the infrastructure, and you actually need a much bigger business to do that than what we had, or you have to start to kind of ratchet it back to really what's important. And we, like I say, I love doing menswear, but I started doing women's wear, and I think that's where we're able to have a little bit more fun with things. So yeah, but watch this space, you know, one day. Hopefully.
Back there.
Hi.
Hi.
What fashion photography, what does it have in your scheme of creation? What position does it have, fashion photography?
What position does it have in what I do? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I work with Nick Knight a lot, and he's, you know, an incredible fashion photographer. I guess working with someone who's able to translate, you know, I've got great ideas when it comes to clothes and when it comes to visuals, but I'm not necessarily the right person to translate those things. And you know, it's important to work with good people, and to work with people who have a really deep appreciation of what is beautiful. And I think fashion imagery is always going to have a power to it, and I think yeah, it's a super important part of the communication process. I mean, I always like to think of myself as an image maker more than I think of myself as a fashion designer, because I can do so many other things. And imagery is, I guess, the currency with which you kind of communicate through your clothes. It's kind of sad when you just see a garment hanging on a rack. I know that goes on to then have a different life, but I have kind of a purist ideal of how I like to see my clothes and the setting in which I like to see them. So yeah, in order to kind of populate that world that I have in my head, the image maker or fashion photographer or filmmaker is super important, because it brings another eye to it. You know, it's the reason why I like to work with Ruth Hogben on films and my stylist Katie Shillingford, because otherwise it's just a homosexual's version of an ideal woman, an idealized woman, and that can be quite a small, you know, niche notion of femininity, whereas to bring on these incredibly strong women and to add their voice to what I do, I think that's super important. So the more people you can add to the conversation, the better. It just kind of adds levels. That was a very roundabout way of answering that, sorry.
We can do one more, and up there in the balcony, they're really excited.
Hi.
Hi.
You were talking about how like the fashion industry is made out of like queer community and also immigrants, and I was wondering, like, you know, with Brexit happening and like, you know, the political environment like changing around the world, like how does it affect your studio practice, and like where do you see it going?
Well, I mean, I didn't really hear that too well, but I guess it's about the current kind of political narrative away from diversity. It's kind of, for me, it's insane, really, how things can, you know, you're in 2017 and you can be asking, you know, in an institution as this, a question like that, but it's a sad reality of the situation that that's kind of where we are. I don't think it's got legs, and I certainly don't think it's a sign of things to come. I think it's it's a sign, it's a real warning sign of allowing certain people the ability to, it's kind of like understanding when you have cancer that you have to have it cut out. And I think, there's such a sense of complacency for such a long time. Even in my admittance that we came to the United States or to New York this time last year to see Hillary Clinton be crowned the first female president, it was, there's this assumption, and actually when those realities are questioned by the actual reality, it's kind of a wake-up call. And I think it's important to understand that we're an industry or a world made up of very different people, and I think there's no way forwards other than to embrace that position. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any, I don't know. It's a very difficult question for me to kind of end on. But yeah, I think I stand very firmly against anything that counters that idea, and I think we're in good company tonight to understand that, to quote Whitney Houston, I believe the children are the future. So, I think it's about education, and it's about, sorry, I'm going to go now.
I think that is a beautiful note to end on, and
Great.
We've come all the way back around to the very beginning of the conversation. Thank you so much for being
Pleasure.
here tonight. Thank you.
Wow.